morning. My name is Wandile Sihlobo. I work for the Agricultural Business Chamber of South Africa. And I want to welcome the people that are joining us at the auditorium here, as well as some of the colleagues that are joining us online. This is another session of Agri in Conversation, where we will reflect on the theme, agricultural landscape post-election. And we have an excellent panel today that will walk us through this conversation. And I will start by introducing them very briefly. On the far left, that's Tian Coutier, who's the COO of Omnia. Tian, we know that you and the colleagues at Omnia are extremely busy, and we are very grateful that you have put time aside to join us this morning. So thank you for that. Next to Tian, it's Professor Freddie Meyer, who many people in agriculture will be familiar with him through the work that they do at BFEP. They do excellent work in guiding our thinking, in policy making, as well as generating some of the data that we find extremely valuable in decision making. Freddie, we are grateful that you could join us this morning. And in the middle, it's the landlord, Tobias, the CEO of Grain SA. Tobias, thank you so very much for hosting us and for joining this conversation. And next to Tobias on the right is the Director General of the Department of Agriculture in South Africa, Ndate Mokitse Ramasodi. And DG, we know that your time is in demand, and we are deeply grateful that you could be with us this morning. So thank you. And on my side, it's a lady that many people might have seen, others may not have seen, but they have seen her work. She does a lot of work at Agri SA, and before that, she did excellent work at SAPO and has done a lot of research when we are thinking about the ESG and adjusting to the challenges of today on climate change. That is Yolanda Andrach. Now she's COO at Agri SA. So folks, thank you so very much for being with us in this conversation. Let me start on that side, on the Professor Freddie Meyer of BFEP. Freddie, I know we are about to talk about agriculture post-elections, but I think it's very important that we first draw the reality of where we are in South Africa. And if you can just give us a sense, 30 years in democracy, how from BFEP side would you guys see the agricultural sector at this point?
No, thanks very much, Wandile, and good afternoon or good morning, everyone. So I think let me briefly talk about the trends that we've observed in markets and how agriculture, the evolution in markets. And then I think we have Ndate Ramasodi can help us a lot about the politics and those dynamics. But if we think about 30 years ago, where agriculture was, we were a sector where the biggest value of the sector was actually unlocked in the domestic market. We didn't have that. Yes, we had wine exports and there was some of it, but the biggest value was in the local market. We had a regulated market, we had marketing boards, we had single channel marketing boards, we didn't even have a futures market. So just imagine all of that. One could, if we think 30 years back and where we are now, with one of the most traded maize contracts in the world, most transparent information systems in the world. It's been 30 years and it's been a great move. So in the 90s, this big shift into a deregulated market. I would say that was the trademark of the late 90s in this first period of democracy for agriculture, moving from a very regulated market into a very deregulated market. And then these opportunities suddenly started opening up. Globalization was big on the topic. Nations started moving together to one another. Economies started moving together. And trade negotiations was actually, I would say, less complex than what we're currently facing. Where we're now sitting with a trend again of nations starting to look internally and trade negotiations becoming very more tricky. In those days, in the, let's say, the early 2000s, it was much easier to trade. South Africa was this wonderful the rainbow nation. Everybody wanted to deal with us, trade with us. Markets opened up, and then I would say that's when, from the investment perspective, that's where we saw a tremendous amount of investment in the fruit industry, in the high value commodities, in the export markets. Those industries started moving very fast. And that's when we saw this big drive in exports. And let's say from 2010 up to 2020, 2024, we had this rapid increase in the value of agriculture, far more valuable in terms of the exports. Now we have about 50% of our value coming from exports. And our domestic market grew as also. I think in the domestic market space, you'll remember when our economy was growing at around about 3, 4, 5%. That's where we saw a lot of newcomers in the space of, let's say, chicken consumption. We saw chicken markets growing rapidly, beef growing rapidly. So even in the domestic market, it was growing fast. And then towards the end of this period, when COVID hit and our economy started slowing down, that's when only we really started focusing more on the export side, and the domestic market got a little bit more stuck. Let me stop there, Wandile. I mean, technology-wise, there's been huge improvements. We have seen marginal land falling out of production. We've seen a lot more investment in irrigation, for example, technology drives. In this period of time, my last point is that, South Africa, in maize and soybeans, we have achieved the fastest growth rate in yields on an annual average base in the world, compared to the US and compared to Brazil. So technology-wise, the South African farming community has made a major investment to keep up with this internationalization, with opening of markets, transparent markets. But it's a different ballgame now, but we'll talk about it in a moment.
Yeah, and I'm looking at Tia, and he's smiling as you are talking when you are talking about technology, because at Omnia, they are among some of the stakeholders that have really been underpinning this improvement that we have seen in productivity. But I'll come to Tia just in a moment. I want to link your point firstly with Tobias. Tobias, this optimism, this growth that Ferdy is talking about within the grain industry, what have you guys observed very briefly, 30 years into democracy?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. As a younger student quite a while ago, I remember studying the Cassie report and the whole world that went away from subsidized and controlled agriculture to free markets. And it's actually been amazing to see what the farmers have done. From a political environment and a thinking, we were extremely internally focused. And then there was a period when we were very internally focused and trying to sort out, how things going to work going forward. And it's as if we've awoken over the last 10 decades, 10, 15 years, competing on international markets, being the best of the best. I think at the end of the day, the interesting thing is, okay, so from a grains perspective, we form the foundation, what people eat every day, the staples, so to speak, and the cost that we feed to the chickens and the beef. So we determine beef prices, the pop prices, and the bread prices. And because the farmers have been so exposed to the international environment, having to compete with the best, we can safely say that we're providing food at the best possible prices to the South African communities. I think that's a huge contribution. Obviously, it's tough competing on the markets, and that's why we're seeing this wonderful story of being at the cutting edge. And regardless of which international companies you speak to, when they come and visit us, the story is the same, that our farmers are the fastest technology adopters that they have experienced across the globe. And it's supporting what Ferdy said. That's why we grow so quickly in the last few years, also because we had to.
Yeah. No, Tobias, I mean, you are right on that, and I was coming to that point intentionally to you. And I don't know how many people online or in the audience get to appreciate this. But if you look at the Southern Africa region, I think South Africa's maize farmers play a huge role. I mean, roughly on an average year, I would say, Ferdy, about 26% or so of the maize production in the Southern Africa region comes from here. So whatever the colleagues do across South Africa, it has huge implication for regional food security. And yourselves, Tian, at Omnia, tends to be behind all of that. Ferdy made the point that the area we farm has declined over time, but productivity gains has increased. I want to just get a sense from you as an input supplier about research, progress that you have made, and all of these efforts to help us achieve this.
Thanks, Wandile. As we're talking through the growth of the SA market and the relative positioning, I'm just thinking about the number of soil tests that we conduct. And as an organization, it conducts the most soil tests in the Southern Hemisphere. Which means it's a reflection of how our farmers are applying practices in making sure that there's sustainable and responsible use of nutrients, as well as making sure that the planning for production and risk management is enhanced. And as you mentioned, we really like to play a role in that context. But that, together with the investment in labs as well as new technologies on the production side, has allowed us to continuously produce more with the same, whether that's from an input perspective and the output perspective. So it's certainly a key objective. It talks to our purpose. We say we're innovating to enhance life and then thereby creating a greener future. And the greener you can interpret in a multiple context in terms of the market in which we operate. But in essence, it's a key investment area, innovation around product, innovation in technologies to allow for greater yield and yield production, and then in a sustainable manner. And I think as an industry, it's important for us to continue to drive towards that sustainability, because that's also what provides us with a competitive advantage internationally. Because in terms of international markets, there's a key focus on sustainable product entering those markets.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that those are really important points that you are raising, because again, Freddie, Prof. Kirsten and the others, we've made the point to say, when you look at least at a gross value added of South Africa's agricultural sector, we roughly more than doubled from 1994 compared to where we are today. And we tend to attribute that to two things: the story of exports that Freddie was talking about, but also those innovations that Tian is citing. They've really helped. So, and I think in many conversations, we tend to talk a lot about the output side without reflecting about the importance of genetics and the input suppliers, because they are the anchor of all of this success that we see. Yolanda, we're talking about these points, and you sit in organized agriculture. In your previous job, you were there, and in a previous job, on your current job, you are in another organized agriculture. And I want to know, with these boards that Freddie was referring to, 1997, deregulation, farmers forming all of these groupings, what's the feeling been like in organized agriculture about the progress since then, 1994?
Well, thanks, Vandita. I think when you take a step back, I've had the privilege of spending a significant time overseas this year and really had the opportunity to look from South Africa from an external perspective. And I was in a highly subsidized environment, and an environment that's been subsidized for more than 100 years. And when you drive around a country such as that and you spend times in the equivalents of land bank and our big co-ops, what you find is entrenched inefficiencies on a cultural level, on a value chain level. And when you look around you, you see so much abundance in terms of natural resources, water, safety, human capital. But when you look to South Africa, you almost see sometimes a lack of that. South Africa is a very arid country, and we have lots of challenges, both on an infrastructure level, on a business environment level. But when you look at the past 30 years, the equation of what makes a difference in South African agriculture is the people and the relationships. I think, in the Western Cape, when I drove in this morning from Cape Town side into Caledon, it's an incredibly stable environment, it's an incredibly safe environment. And yes, you see the microcosm of South African challenges as you drive. But what is interesting in South Africa is that the environment is incredibly diverse. So the challenges that farmers face in this region is fundamentally different in a place like Northwest, KZN, Mpumalanga, or Limpopo. And if you ask yourself what makes the difference and what drives progress on an organized agricultural level, and to your point of reflecting on 30 years, I think it's our ability to act in an organized fashion and to build relationships on a community level. If you think of the progress that was made, whether it's on research, whether it's on trade, whether it's on biosecurity, both in a commercial or in a formal context, or in an informal context, a lot of it has come down to the fact that communities and organized agriculture and industry associations has taken ownership of their future. And that's exactly what happened as a result of the deregulation in the early or late 90s and early 2000s. It's the fact that value chains came together and organized on a statutory basis largely, but also on a voluntary basis, how they're going to respond to the needs of their value chains. And this is something I think we should be incredibly proud of. The ability to have industry associations that can partner with government and to mobilize commercial farmers and agribusinesses on a community level, but also on a provincial and national level, is what discerns us and what makes us efficient on a global level. If you stand in a Costco a wholesale center, and you see the dorings, white grapes, next to the spectrum of Latin American countries, then you see the fruit, not just of the farmers from the dorings, but from South African Table Grape Institute. So it's a value chain of people that acted in a coordinated fashion over a long period of time that brought us to where we are. And as organized agriculture, I believe we should be incredibly proud of that.
Yeah. No, absolutely, Yolanda, on that, on building Team South Africa. I've asked you, colleagues, all of these questions before asking the landlord of the country now, the department, because there's always, among South Africans, whenever we are confronted by problems, we tend to have a fatalistic mindset where we say everything is falling apart. And we know who to blame. We'll say this government, DG. So we wanted DG to get a sense about how the colleagues are reflecting on the progress that we have made. Because as you hear from Yolanda, it is an appreciation of the collaboration between private sector, society, and government to deliver that. But I want to come to you to say, looking at all of this progress and looking all of this time, how would you review, how do you think, and also what were the years, you've been in government for many years, opening up these markets, dealing with the international stakeholders, what was that environment like, and if you compare it with where we're sitting today?
No, thank you very much, Wendy. I think it's very important maybe to even contextualize what we are saying.
Right.
Failure has got to have a face.
Yes.
And in most cases, it has got to be apportioned to government. But I also always say that since the years that we have been working as a collective, there's one thing about this sector that I so dearly entrench in terms of the way that we think, is that since the formative years in 1994, from the Batat document that ushered in where we are today, to the sector plan that we had in 2001, going through all the stages from the agricultural action plan that we had to where we are in terms of the agriculture and agro-processing master plan, one thing that is constant is that we have been able to change to the way that and adapt to what the world needs. I mean, you can look at the formation of the WTO in 1995, where they preached liberalization. South Africa liberalized to a point where, at this moment, most of the countries are subsidizing extensively. And we have got farmers who have got to do with less of government intervention in terms of financing. But where are our farmers today? They are one of the best farmers that we have in the world. Yolandi says she looks around when she travels and looks at the products that we are having all around the world. That's my favorite pastime. I go and compare South African product to any other product.
Yes.
And the other products come far second best because of the farmers that we have in South Africa. Now, coming to your question that you have asked, where have we been? I think from a policy environment, we have done quite a few of tactical changes that were required by the farmers. Because if we don't listen to what the farmer is saying to government, what agribusiness is saying to government, we'll never be able to move. Talking to issues around technology changes that we have in our world, if Act 36, in terms of what we're talking about, the issues around policy ambiguity, if we don't change in terms of Act 36, we are likely to have quite a lot of challenges going forward. If
Is that a promise that you will give us the changes we need?
Yeah. If we don't move in terms of the GMO Act and your favorite topic in terms of the new technologies, breeding technologies, you're likely to have that problem persisting. So as government, we have got to be in step with what is happening all around the world. Now, it is very important at this moment to indicate, because the topic says that where are we going? And one thing that is very consistent, and I liked what MEC Mayor was saying earlier today, to say let's make the South African agriculture to be great, not only what we're looking for in the Western Cape, but everywhere. How do we do that? The Agriculture and Agro-Processing Master Plan has been the center of where we want to go. what has happened in terms of the new GNU government coming in and looking at things, you have never heard Minister Steenhuisen making a parallel kind of pronouncement. He says, let us just make sure that the pace at which we deliver is just enhanced. And that is where agriculture is going. And that is where I think everybody who's within the sector needs to go. Lots of progress made in the last 30 years. And it's very important to reflect on the successes, but at the same time, learning from the failures that we have had during that period. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, DG, for that. And I think it's important, really, as we imagine then where South Africa should be. We all appreciate that the progress has been there. And not only in terms of the agricultural production, but also in employment. Because if you look at the people employed in primary agriculture in 1994 compared to where we are, even with all of these technological changes, what we have seen is really the shift between certain subsectors and a more improvement in horticulture and a reduction in some subsectors. But on general, we still play an important role there. And this draws me to you, Tobias, on saying the DG has already kicked the point about we are now in a government of national unity and in line with the theme of today. What would you guys, sitting at Grain SA, sitting in the grain industry, view as your top or three key things to say, yes, we see the master plan, it's our guiding light, but what are the three things that you really want to see them taking forward? The DG is taking a note out, he's going to write, so you have to think carefully about this.
Wandile, I think the first thing is DG mentioned the transition, and it's a little bit like a mini miracle. It's such a privilege to be part of this, where we had a change in political leadership, and yet our strategy is exactly the same. The only strategy that we've got is let's do what we do faster. And, you know, so the singularity or this agreement that we've got in South Africa is something that we should appreciate. Yeah, what do we need to move up? I mean, DG's mentioned the size of technology. I think NBTs is a small part of it. There's cultivars, there's genetics, there's the biotech that's coming in. What are we going to do with that? That's quite a challenge because we need to understand it ourselves first. But where do we want to be as agriculture? We want to be a sector contributing to the wealth, bringing communities and making the world a better place. And that means that we probably have to be focused on the international markets. So we have to get ready to produce better and cheaper than anybody else. And then we need access to the markets. And that speaks to a lot of things from local logistics through to international logistics harbors and those kind of things. So I think this whole new vision of how do we make South Africa a wealthy country by putting these things in place. And that's infrastructure, technology, and a pet topic of mine is spatial exclusion. I think maybe we should compliment ourselves and say, guys, we've had an amazing run in terms of sound policy in South Africa. The balance between state and entrepreneurs or state and business has been very good. That's why we're in such a good place. But now, what's the next step? And that's now, it's not only balance, it's about a partnership. That partnership is how do we make more money for all of South Africa, and how do we unblock those channels and become more competitive. Yeah. I'm not going to go into the detail now. I think there's a number of things. F36, the GMOs, those kind of things, and the logistics, electricity's been sorted. Yeah. So let's move forward and faster.
No, Tobias, and I think taking the points that you are making, thinking about Operation Vulindlela 2.0, as DG Dr. Duncan Peterson calls it, I would say you are partially covered or largely covered on that, because they deal with electricity, they deal with the logistics, and in the master plan we deal with those genetics and the exports. But Freddie, when he used to present, do you still present in the master plan, or you have on the baseline, or you have delegated to Tracy? He used to have a nice cover on the slide, where there was one part on the farm that is somewhere in the Northern Cape. It's a dry patch of land. And the other, it's where there's been an investment. And there's enormous progress in production on that. And that's the two agricultures, Freddie.
Correct.
Tobias now just made an important point about the disparities in agriculture being on a special issue. How do we begin then, Freddie, on closing the dualism under the GNU in the context of the thinking of the master plan? What do you see as some of the things we really have to move on?
Yeah, so that picture was taken in the Northern Cape, and it's the table grapes and the shade netting where it's more than R1 million. I always say that's the R1 million. This is and it's literally next to the road. It's R1,000 a hectare, and that's R1 million a hectare. I mean, that's a story of policy certainty, investment, access to finance, markets. That is, in essence, captures a lot of what we're facing, the challenge that we're facing. So the way that I always, if you think about the master plan, and that's still part of the presentation that I do, Wandile, so on the baseline. So if we think about the master plan, you get two sides. The one side says, it's only focused on commercial export markets, and the other side says, no, it's all about transformation. They've even counted the number of transformation words in the document. I said to them, no, it's a market-led approach where we want competitive value chains in the global market, which create the pull for people to enter the chain. And how do we do that together? So it's a market-led approach, which implies we look at the total value chain, we look at where are the bottlenecks within the value chain, and who's going to do what. That's the third point. Who's going to do what's a very important one, and we'll come to that in a moment. But in essence, it's the challenge, Wandile, of we are talking about all this wonderful success, and we have an open market, we don't want to be globally competitive, but we need to bring new people into the market who don't necessarily have the scale often. They don't have the access to finance. They don't have the experience. And if we now read Nick Fink's documents and all the old stories in the old apartheid time also, they tried to establish a lot of white farmers in those times where there were a lot of failures in those times. They also gave a lot of support and access. And we need to work with these realities of bringing farmers into value chains which are very open, very competitive, but we need to make it inclusive. We need to ensure that we give them the right support in order to grow into these chains. Now, our argument is in the way that the master plan is structured is carefully looks at the market, where are opportunities, domestically, internationally. See if we can unlock more of those. That's why the opening of markets is so important. And then ensure that this pull comes all the way down to the areas which have not been included in our value chain, straight through from the small farmers, new commercial emerging farmers, into the SMEs, straight through the chain.
No, absolutely, Freddie. And I think perhaps maybe as South Africans, one of the things we may want to think about is to even redefine the term transformation, because on Freddie, the point that he makes that others were resisting the master plan and calculating how many times a transformation has been made is because in our minds it has tended to be viewed as a zero-sum game. You are taking from the other one. But really it's about building and growing the agricultural pie of South Africa. And I think we may have to start rethinking about that term. Is not really a zero-sum game. And Yolanda, on your side, I mean, many people always say the plans are there. Why is the government not implementing the plans? But the master plan is not a government plan. It's a South African plan. All stakeholders was co-created. What are some of the steps that you folks in the private sector are thinking of taking as we embark now with the implementation process of that particular plan?
So, Wandile, I think it was in the beginning of 2020 that when the first master plan meeting was called, and right through the COVID period, I think many value chains spent many hours with Ferdi and the team doing value chain deep dives. And out of that, a plan, or rather a compact, was produced. And I think as agriculturists and as members of this community, we need to own up to the fact that many of the things that is mentioned in these plans have also been captured in previous documents, and there's clear threats and challenges and opportunities across multiple value chains that we are all aware of. And if you think about, from an implementation perspective, the crux of it comes down to the relationships between DG Ramasode and ourselves, and how we found ourselves on some of the key issues, whether it's on expanding market access, addressing non-tariff issues and tariff issues, dealing with animal health concerns, And I think sometimes we, as agriculturalists, when we think about solutions, and just thinking of animal health specifically, it's forcing us to build relationships in places we don't necessarily go. To make it practical for you, it's not animals that move themselves; it's people that move animals. So when you think about how to accelerate the implementation of the master plan, it's how we live agriculture. Yeah. And it's how we go about our business. And that's something that, we should all take ownership of. It's not a plan that sits in the office of DG Ramasori up in Pretoria and we all feel distance down here in rural South Africa. It's something that we will have to live. And I think, the progress that Ferdi has mentioned over the past few years, in the baseline, it stresses the fact that over the past few years, just since COVID, we've had record spending on agricultural machinery and inputs. And, if you think about the past 4 years in the world, there's been so much noise. And even in South Africa, there's been so much uncertainty leading up to just this general election that we had. And I mean, I've been out of the country before the time and I came back after the election. It's like chalk and cheese. So from an ownership perspective and from a compact perspective, what we should realize is that, our money is already in the ground. We've already invested as agriculture. That shows how positive we are about our futures here in South Africa. So it gets down to the fact of, put your head down and work. It's not going to come by itself. It's not going to happen out of some office in Pretoria. Changing agriculture and addressing the challenges that we deal with is certainly something that we need to take ownership of.
No, absolutely. DG, just before I jump into Tian, I'm looking at some of the things here that are coming up from people. The story of logistics. What conversations are you having with your colleagues that are in the Department of Transport and the others? Because one of the things is one thing where we spend a lot of time, Dr. Mayor and colleagues in the Western Cape talking to folks at the ports and everywhere else, but the provincial roads in the rural roads are some of the things that are actually increasing the transaction costs for farmers in a really tough way. How are you guys as a department speaking with your colleagues and what's the plans there?
Okay. No, thank you very much, Wendy. And Yolanda keeps on touching on very important issues.
Right.
One of those would be an issue that we're raising, the fast tracking of the implementation of the agriculture and agro-processing master plan. And at some stage, maybe we sort of indicating that we're not moving. In actual fact, we're moving at a breakneck speed. If you have got to look at the agreements that we had on blended finance, and we look at the money that is being pumped through the IDC, you look at the money that is going through the land bank, the transactions that are being made there, you suddenly see that that commitment that government had in terms of blended finance is actually now taking root in terms of transactions, individual transactions that you can see, especially in the poultry master plan and also in the side of the subsistence farmers in dealing with the issues of growing production. Now, coming to the issue around port congestion, and I'm happy that MEC is here. It is quite interesting from ourselves that we had so much big congestion at the ports, but for the year 2013, our exports have reached record levels, $13.2 billion. Now, it should say to you that there are interventions that are being made, whether at provincial level or any other space, to ensure that we export out of the very same situations that we find ourselves in. And this is by no means discounting what we need to do to ensure that the ports are efficient. If we move quicker and faster, we'll be able to deal with that. When it comes to rural roads, there is a program that we have in the department through our branch of rural development to ensure that we coordinate the issue around rural roads. The previous minister that we had here said that to all of us, I think if you recall, is a code that we have got to do, that you move a tomato from a farm and when you get to the market, it's already a tomato paste. So we need to ensure that we deal with these issues at a point where we have got good rural roads as enablers to take us to the market. So we are engaging with all that are involved to to ensure that we have got that. We also, through engagements with the sector, having a standing arrangement with Transnet just to deal with the issues of port efficiency. So there are those interventions, and I would like to call on industry if there are any other areas where we need to be holding hands that they can also highlight so that we can be able to grease this process and ensure that South Africa performs.
No, that's very important, Digi, because there's a lot of people that are watching online, and I think some bit of guidance on this gets to be very important. Freddie,
Can I quickly add to
sure.
that? Just one on the logistics again. I think maybe as agriculture, and Yolanda was referring to it, it's the story that we're telling as agriculture. I always say, are we telling the 3% story? Because that's what agriculture's share of the economy, or are we telling the 14% story?
Yeah.
And the 14% is the integrated value chain story. And that excludes the informal part of agriculture in the rural areas which we're not measuring. And sometimes, and we know that we look at ourselves and we're saying, are we also only telling the 3% story? Are we telling the 14% story? And in the logistics discussion, Ntate Ramasodi, you have all the experience in there. I think sometimes it's, if you look at mining, it's about prioritizing, isn't it? They only have a finite amount of money to spend, and who's going to get that pool for infrastructure development? Because the reality is in agriculture, we're doing great, we are improving on what we have in terms of infrastructure, making it more efficient. But the reality is, in the next 5 to 6 years, our projections by 2030, we'll have 1.3 million tons more of high-value fruit hitting those ports. So it's just the reality is the existing infrastructure is not going to hold. Even if we take it to the optimal efficiency, we'll need real stuff in there. We'll need cranes. We need hard infrastructure to invest. And the story is, can we bring the 14% story and tell the whole value chain addition? That's how we need to sell agriculture to the colleagues in other departments.
Yeah, and Freddie, I'm gonna come just in a bit to Tobias to think about that, to say how should we be thinking about that investment? Because I think the point Freddie is raising is super important. We made the point that our sector has more than doubled since 1994. But if you were to look at how much expansion have been done at the ports to accommodate this volume, we have not really done a lot of work to ensure that the logistics keeps up with the output that we have, which is why we hit this snag. And I think this is something that I will come up. But I want to come to you, Tian, in here, because we are busy preparing and thinking about these things. But at the core, it's always you guys in the input side, in the seeds, in the genetics, in the nutrition, in the input side, either fertilizer and agrochemicals, that have to assist us on achieving this journey. And how are you seeing the level of investments, the work on research, on ensuring that even on the sustainability conversation that is happening, Omnia and the others in the space continue to do well?
Thanks, Mandile. Maybe if I can shift it a little bit towards the sustainability of supply, or the certainty of supply, and how what we just discussed in terms of transport impacts us and our ability to make sure that the agriculture industry gets what it needs to grow. So our business requires a value chain that brings in ammonia as well as other feedstocks into the agriculture market. So we are heavily reliant on Transnet to provide that infrastructure and to continue to manage that. And as an organization, ourselves and our competitors, we've invested in rail wagons and in the whole infrastructure, and we're still reliant on an entity like Transnet to draw or pull the locomotives. But what we have seen through the Logistics Crisis Committee and working with the likes of Transnet and Sasol and other parties who we typically won't work with because of the competitive nature of the environment, we've seen progress in the ability to leverage each other's capacity and make sure that there's smaller packages of goods moving more regularly to to not result in big risks and allowing us to continuously supply on an ongoing basis without having to build these massive stockpiles. So what that means in the context of the master plan is if we can work better together on the logistics and really leverage each other's capacity. And if we look at roads, it's our biggest single risk factor from a safety perspective. We see the quality of roads, whether it's on the highways and the big, what looks like really good roads, all the way to the rural roads where we deliver product on farm. It's really it's probably where we spend most of our capital to ensure safety of our staff, our clients, and the communities in which we operate, because what we move around can impact those communities. So from a logistics component of the master plan, that's if I had to look at 3 key components of the master plan that really speaks to the Omnia strategy, it's in the innovation and technology we discussed, the logistics component, and then the skills in education and really drawing all communities into the benefit of inclusive growth. And I think that's what we stand for and what we're really investing our capital in.
What are you guys doing on the skills side and the training?
So from an internal focused perspective in training our staff, as well as the ability to fund the training of our employees' kids, through to industry specific training components, we developed a training center in Sasolburg that's focused on agriculture. So we train future agronomists, future farmers in the training facility. We focused on females in the set industry, and we've developed a number of programs there. But our competitiveness is really within the agriculture industry and the technologies. So we've developed a value chain there of taking people through that, whether it's our clients or the future generations to be ready to help us grow.
Yeah, no, I'm asking that, Jan, because I'm always interested in those points, because we have seen the knock that we have felt on the ARC. The administration now, the 7th administration, is working on rebuilding that. Dr. Lita is doing excellent work on rebuilding the ARC, OBP, and the others. But I always have to pay attention on the private sector as well, because that's where sustainability and the long-term future of South Africa lies on in those work. Tobias, you hear that there was the point about the investments that needs to be made in logistics and all of these things. Are you guys, as on the industry side, looking into this on saying government on a fiscal side, these are public areas, you should be working on this, or are there any other ideas that you are seeing from the world and perhaps maybe thinking that there could be core investments of some sort in logistics? Yeah.
So, Wandile, the bigger picture is where are we currently at? And,
sure.
and the key challenge is that electricity constrained our growth, the capacity of the ports constrained our growth. The capacity of our roads is making it expensive. And so really the growth opportunity that we missed in the last few decades was really because of the constraints. So I think we're working very hard and very nicely to optimize what we've got. And I think some real plans are coming out of that. But if we are saying that we want to turn agriculture into this wealth creating asset for South Africa, is we need to start thinking in terms of what are the needs. So if we want to double the exports, well, you need double the port capacity. A simple example is the soil guys wanting to export canola. You can't export it through the Cape Town harbour. You have to containerize it first. There's not a bulk terminal where you can export canola in bulk. So now we need to start thinking about where are the things that we want to export. Looking at the Eastern Cape, amazing opportunity. You've got great agricultural conditions, be it for livestock, be it for the grains. But how are you going to get it? How are you going to export it? So you need to do that business to bring wealth into the region, but we need to start planning about that infrastructure. And I think that's where now where the TACAID's, the TAR in terms of the AAMP is to sit down and say, guys, if we need irrigation to expand our production capacity, how many dams do we need? We need a port that can double its capacity to facilitate all of the product flowing through. Those kind of things we really need to dig in. One thing that I want to bring in is also local municipalities. That is a huge challenge because this is an environment in which we operate, where the people engaged in our value chains live. It's led to a depopulation, or the people moving to the urbanization. We need the skills, we need the clever people with nice sanitation, health, nice training in the local towns, so that we can bring those areas into economic prosperity as well.
Yeah, no, fantastic, Tobias, all right. And I like what you're saying, because the Minister on Infrastructure, Dean McPherson, has said the point that he wants to turn South Africa into a construction site. And I get happy to hear those things, because there are many South Africans at an age between 18 and 35 that do not have university degrees like many people. And I think that they can benefit greatly in any jobs that could be created in that space. So it's both modernizing South Africa, but also opening up those job opportunities that could be there. Yolanda, you're hearing us, we talk about the exports, we talk about logistics, but at the end of the day, the world is also changing and emphasizing a lot around sustainability, thinking about climate, thinking back on your work at SAPO, on the work in Canada, as well as where we're sitting. Is South Africa's agricultural sector and the practices really aligned with, and conscious to what the global practices are moving towards in an environmental basis?
Delia, I think we have an incredible asset in South Africa, and it's in the context of sustainability and climate change. It's underrated, and that's the fact that in many value chains, especially down here in the Western Cape, we have standards such as CESA and WETA and in other environmental standards. We have the EIA that's applicable to some of the livestock industries. So there's a lot of good assets already in place that allows us to speak to what happens on an environmental level here in South Africa. And it's certainly something that we can build on. I think globally what we found is when you look at the North American market, I found the North American market incredibly climate skeptic, which was to an extent very surprising. When you engage in Canada and in the northern parts of America on climate change, we are not seeing the rate of adaptation that we are seeing on the African continent. Again, there is an abundance of funds available, and when you go and you see where these funds are spent, you look at Latin America, you look at Brazil, and you look at Chile, and you look at Mexico. So from a North American perspective, I think the narrative is different. Is the reality different? No, climate change is fundamentally experienced. On that side of the world, the increase in frost days and heat days is something that they tracked on a very detailed basis. I think on the European side, what we've seen, and we've done some analysis in Canada, looking back both on the North American side and the European side, is sustainability is very regulatory driven. So it's a response to what happens on a regulatory response within governments, whether it's the EU Green Deal or financial regulations changing. But it's a response to both reporting standards and an expectation on management practices. We see that to an extent, and some of the banking colleagues here can maybe attest to that, in the South African environment it's playing out. From a futures perspective, I think we're well positioned to work with both financial institutions and insurance companies, as well as the input suppliers, to actually incentivize sustainable practices. Sustainability is not a stick. It's not something that should stand in contradiction to commercial viability of a farm or an agribusiness. And across the world, there are multiple examples of actually rewarding farmers for sustainable practices. In the context of South Africa, where we are expecting severe climate changes, especially in the central part of South Africa and down here in the Western Cape, working both in a private sector context and in collaboration with government to incentivize and almost finance the transition to where we should go from a futures perspective and with an eye on food security. It's an important aspect, but we certainly have good asset blocks in place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think then, Yolanda, we also have to think about the story that we tell about the progress that we are making. And I think that's an important one. Yes, Tobias?
Wandile, I think we're getting it totally wrong. I'm being a bit naughty here.
Yeah.
But the ESG thing, we need to change our thinking, our narrative, and also where we invest and where we put our efforts.
Right.
we're being captured a little bit by the international ESG debate. There's no SG, there's just E. That's not right. We've got a bigger national responsibility. There's our social structures, our governance needs to get right, and we can't sacrifice our environment to do that. However, there needs to be some pragmatism. And I think that the other part that we as agriculture need to get right, Ferry mentioned a great story in terms of environmental responsibility. We're producing more than ever before of fewer hectares. I mean, think of the environmental impact. So
we're not deforesting.
We're not deforesting. We're not doing this. So where should we be focusing to really address the environmental impact that we are doing? Not on the rules and the regulations, but let's be more productive from what we've got. Let's feed more people. Let's do more business without necessarily plowing up. If you produce more of 1 hectare, you still use the same diesel. And that's the beautiful story. What's the biggest change that we can make in using less carbon is, let's look at the productivity, the how many lambs we got, how many calves we get from our herds. If you increase that from 10% to 20% to 50%, that's a huge change of exactly the same natural resources. So let's look at productivity. Let's look at investment in improving our productivity, using the same resources, and let's forget all of these strange rules and reports and things that you need to fill out, and just do what we do better. I think if we can change the narrative in that direction, we'll be much better off.
I'm so glad that you are mentioning this. John Hudson at Nedbank is in their house, and the other bankers. So, I think really the important point of emphasizing also the other letters and not focusing only on S on E, because I think when we are thinking about sustainability of South Africa socially and on a governance side, as you rightly say, those are all the important aspects. DG, Freddie made an important point earlier where he was saying in the early 2000s we were able to open up all of these export markets. We were all thinking about globalization and everything, but now there may be a new sheriff in the US or not. We don't know. There was an interesting debate 2 days ago or so. But the thinking in the world is all of this fragmentation. So how are you having the conversation so that what TN is doing on boosting productivity, what Tobias is able to produce with grains and the other farmers, Yolanda's members across all value chains, Freddie's insights in guiding us where the markets are. But at the end of the day, you have, and the DTIC and the DERCO, to go and talk to people. What's the conversation internationally now compared to back then, and how are you guys ensuring that you continue to see wins?
No, thank you very much. Let me just pick on this exciting...
On this ESG?
Yes, because...
trade is always interesting.
When I started off, I spoke about the accountability metrics where there would be a phase for blaming. But I'm happy with what came at the moment. But he is very, 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 very true to the issues that we have got to deal with. When I attended the National Wool Growers Association's engagements, and they were talking about ethical standards, there was an who just stood up and said, whatever that you are saying, we are already doing. So what is that you want us to do that is not what we are doing? So all that we have got to do from an African perspective is that instead of following standards that have been set, let us write our own standards. It's just a pity that we don't write it out to say here's a standard of producing a Karoo lamp in terms of an area where we have got to do. That's one thing that I wanted just to say Dr. Tobias is right on. When it comes to the world, ESGs being one, there's a proliferation of private standards these days in the world. And one of the things that we have got to check is that world trade, the way that it's is that the minimum standards are standards that are set by governments, and they are regulated in government terms. Now, business has seen an opportunity just to do a markup in terms of the E in order for them to make more money. That's basically what's happening. We have also seen in terms of the world that there is a lot of protectionism. In the past, you would have trading partners using tariffs to deal with the issues. Now you have got a proliferation of non-tariff barriers that are coming into the system. And since 1995, you have got a problem, because the WTO is not really transforming at the rate at which we would want to them to transform with. We have had now 12 ministerial conferences where engagements on agriculture have just broken down to a level where you would not even get something tangible coming out of those areas. So the world has changed since 1995. It has gone to a point where you have got to find trading partners who would listen to you. And I'm ending it off in terms of how strategic would South Africa need to be in order for us to move. Last week, Minister Steenhuisen, on the margins of the Forum on China and Africa cooperation, signed 3 agreements with China. This is the first time that we sign more than one. It's 3 that have been signed. One on FMD, one that says to South Africa, future-proof any occurrence of FMD in your country to a point where if you don't have FMD outbreak in a particular area, then you can still export from other areas. That's a momentous occasion that we have got to look. The second one would be on the export of greasy wool. And you all know in terms of transformation where most of the greasy wool comes from. And that has been signed off for us to ensure that we can export that. And lastly, on dairy products. Now, the truth is that we have got to identify at a bilateral level those that we can identify with. And we should also go to a point as a country thinking about what kind of multilateral agreements would assist South Africa to move in a space so that we are not caught in a place where we have got to negotiate ad infinitum on issues that even if at some stage you have got to say, here's a progress where we can go and appeal, you will be appealing into a void because there's no appellate. So those are the issues that we have got to deal with at the international level.
No, those are very important, DG. And I must underscore the point that the visit to China is super important. Each year, China imports just over $200 billion of agricultural products. And to the point of the DG about the greasy wool, 70% of our exports on wool already go to China, and China is a major buyer of wool in the world. And I think securing that market for us and securing also for the livestock industry is very important. I see Davi is looking on the side in the audience. Davi Murray is from FNB, and because I called only John Hudson of Nedbank, but FNB and ABSA, I hope they are also listening on that particular point. But DG, let me stay with you for a moment here, because we have talked about trade as part of this conversation. We have talked about the logistics, but we in the Western Cape today, and we must also talk about the land. And here you have made enormous progress in numbers that Ferdy, Professor Johan Kirsten, Professor Nick Fink, and ourselves have looked at. We think that there's more progress on land reform that has been made, but without much transfer of that land to Black South Africans. And I would like you to articulate what's the official policy thinking about that over 2 million hectares of land, because you already started giving title deeds before elections.
No, that program continues. Government would continue issuing title deeds to the farmers who are on proactive land, acquired land that we have in our country, and therefore there is no change in terms of this. Minister Nyonzo has also articulated the very same position. The only thing that we are currently doing is to ensure that there is compliance to the set criteria of those farmers, and land would then be issued to the farmers. Thank you.
No, that's excellent, DG, because I think it's an important point, because we are sitting in this hall with the number of the input suppliers. And when we think about that over 2 million hectares of lands, those are new clients, but also that's the new area of growth. Ferdy, taking that land and that point and bridging in with all of the numbers that you are looking at BFEP, how do you see that delivering in terms of growth in the fortunes as well as expansion in jobs?
Yeah, so that's a good question, Wandile. So we had in the master plan, there's land that comes in because what we need to do is also look at the capital to unlock the value of that land. So it's not only the land, and I agree, land is, it's a key starting building block, because you can unlock that's a security of tenure and everything that goes along with it. But we need to re-equip the land also. So if we look at that whole package, and I'm including in that also, DG, you'll recall we at that idle irrigation land, also critical because there are water rights, there's water, the land is there. We need to connect the people, we need to get it reinvested. So Wandile, a long story short, is if we domestically, in the domestic market, we don't have the buying power, let's be honest, to absorb all of that product. We'll have to go international. We'll have to, so it couples with infrastructure, it couples with opening of markets. So yes, the idea is bring that in. So we, for example, on the pasture land, it gives us about 200,000 more weaner calves that we could pull into the value chains, and we pull that through the feedlots, and there's an export market for it. So there are practical, we did some numbers around it saying if this land if we would revitalize it, grow the productivity of our herd, pull more feed from the grain guys, there is market space, but you'll have to bring it as a package. Otherwise what we'll see is the cliff. And you know about the price cliff, and we don't want that because you're going to set them up for failure. And that's what in the master plan discussions, we had this big debate around mass production. I said to them, guys, no, mass production is price cliff in the back of my mind. We need integrated value chains. We need that pull, and I think that's what we've been talking about this morning.
Yes. No, and I know that we are going to go to the audience just briefly on a few questions, but I have to ask Tobias, at Grain SA, your predecessor, Umyane de Villiers, used to make a point that the miners are taking his land in Mpumalanga. Are you setting yourself up right to ensure that you have the skilled individual in your development program so that when the DG and the others are looking around to say where can the allocations be, you guys will be able to be a hand of assistance on that?
Yeah, that's a whole other topic, but yes, no, it's something that we definitely need to look in. I think our colleagues in the environmental affairs have been a little bit ahead of us. So if you look at the rehabilitation requirements for a wetland is way more than the rehabilitation requirements for a piece of crop production field. So I think we need to get in there and say, guys, when you rehabilitate after a mine, we need to get to a certain level of production, and you must build the layers back and rehabilitate in that way, so that we can actually do both. Let's not be caught in a false dichotomy. We need the minerals to build our bigger economy, but let's do it in such a way that we can bring that area back into productive agricultural growth going forward.
No, fantastic. Thanks, Tobias. Tian, you guys are looking also at these 2 million hectares of land. And are you well set up if it's in the Eastern Cape elsewhere so that the capabilities of Omnia and the others, you're able to assist and participate in those areas?
And as I mentioned before, we are developing skills to assist. So through our training programs, we not only focused on the infrastructure and logistics to service those markets, but also thinking of the people that we need in those spaces to help. On the one side, to give the advice and to help with the farmer, and on the other side, developing the farmer themselves through the training programs. So in terms of the logistics network, it's possible to achieve, but I think it's also making sure that there's a competent person, educated, trained to be able to farm. And I think that is the key for us as well.
No, absolutely. And I think the likes of Grain SA, Fruit SA, RMIS and the others are practicing and ensuring that we do have those individuals that will collaborate. Let me see in the audience if we have a couple of questions. Yes, at the back we see one. If we could get by a show of hand, any questions? And then John, after that, is there any? We'll take 3 at a time. Okay, fantastic. Thank you, sir.
Good morning, DG. Good morning, Minister Mayor and Forum. A couple of weeks ago, I was at Hermanus for Business breakfast with Alec Hogg. One of the questions posed was, is the Western Cape under threat from junior miners? And Graan SA, that's a bit of a hot potato, especially in the Overberg. If we look at the square meterage or kilometers of the Overberg, we're talking 12,000 square kilometers, 30 kilometers from where we are currently sitting. We're under threat of a mining application, which is a footprint of about 4,000 hectares. That would be catastrophic for the Overberg. The Overberg, if you look at the size of Nampu here, this is a massive engine, supply chain of agriculture. So the only message as a private individual, I've lived here for 15 years, is that at government level and at ministerial level and at local municipality level, that the due attention is paid to this and that the right decisions are made. Because just to put it into context, Matonshoek, Beketberg, there's an application there that's been running for 19 years. We don't want to go down that road. So that's it in short. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. John?
Thank you, Wandile. My question, I suppose, is directed to the DG, but I guess the private sector players as well, and also organised agriculture. I think there's no debate that broadly government and private sector are aligned. I think we understand what the challenges are, and I don't pretend to understand the complexity that the DG faces day to day in terms of solving for a very diverse sort of agricultural sector. My question is we all know the risks that we face that's been discussed a few times and mentioned, and unfortunately many of those are leading to increased cost of doing business, whereas on farm the farmers are doing a lot to improve the efficiency. So we've seen that in efficiency gains, that have been mentioned. I'm worried that on one end the efficiency gains are being achieved and on the other we're not. And therefore, how do we gain the momentum and the urgency around it? So possibly the question to the DG is, how do we bring the urgency into this? And whether it's a blended finance scheme, which I was involved from 2015, and we're in almost 10 years down the line, and the commercial banks are hopefully getting on board. And I'm not saying that the government is at fault here, but both sides of the coin. How do we get the urgency and really get on with the job? Thanks.
Thank you so very much, John, for that. And I think that, John's question, we're really not going to fry the DG only, but everyone around the table, because that master plan is a co-creation process, and we all have to say, what are we going to do with that? But DG, kick us off, and then we'll do the rounds on that.
No, thank you very much. The issue around the competition between mining and agriculture has been very topical. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those divisive engagements that we have had. And at some stage, there were engagements with the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy then on what kind of strategies can we develop as government to ensure that even if we have got mining license application, there would be, firstly, a level of coexistence, and secondly, an issue on ensuring that once the mining process is done, that the rehabilitation would allow us to use the land. Now, we have got an act that we want to promulgate through government, through which the Preservation and Development of Agricultural Land Act, which really seeks to say, why do we destroy what would be providing food for short-term gains as a country? And a part of the engagements that we have had when the bill was going through the consultation processes was consultation with the Department of Mineral Resources, specifically around the issues of which of our land is agricultural land. Because we don't have a lot of arable land in our country, contrary to what many people believe. So the little bit that we have got to preserve. And I think that I'm speaking on behalf of Dr. Meyer here when I say we will then look at the issues that have been raised from your side, because when you do that application, there needs to be a process that needs to be followed. And obviously from our side, being from agriculture, that's something that we have got to look at. Now, what kind of processes would we follow in order to ensure that we fast track the implementation of of the AMP. Now, the AMP in terms of its structuring has got a few structures that mean that at the end of the day, the operations happen within AMP. And I think it's about time, and it involves everybody who's around this table, that where there are hiccups, we move. Even if we have got a clearinghouse, we develop a separate way of how do we have a clearinghouse for issues that would be saying are stubbornly not moving, so that we can be able to engage with them quicker. I think that's the only way that we can move on this issue, because I think like Peak committed to a breakfast, all of us are committed to the AMP. There's no person who's involved in AMP.
We're all big.
It's that level of engagement that all of us have in terms of the AMP. And I think everybody who's going to deal with this has got to bring a shoulder to the wheel, and let's assist each other to push this in a positive direction. Now, I'm not here to promote any banks, but I know that the red have joined, and I hope that the green, the blue, and the almost, what is that color, turquoise, would also join us in terms of this. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, DG, for that. Let me take the views as really summarizing also the roundup on how do you think the sense of urgency and implementation. Let's start with you, Tian, on your side, and also how do you feel about where we are in the GNU in agriculture at this moment? Just to sum up.
I think Fernanda mentioned the difference between before and after, and one of the key statistics was the GDP growth that we saw recently published on the quarterly 0.4 improvement, and I think a lot of that is a reflection of people's attitudes as opposed to a real big shift in the underlying. So from a GNU or a new phase in South Africa perspective, the electricity issues we've seen reduced, that's been a big win. I think I mentioned the logistics focus that we've seen from a presidential level. That's been a big win for us. The challenges we see, and I think they are recognized and there's focus, it's around water and some of our other resources where we have to make sure that we put sufficient effort and focus in and to drive the inclusive growth that we're referring to. So as a community and as South Africa, we really have to put our foot on the pedal. I think there's so much more we can do, so much quicker, and it's up to us to make that work.
Fantastic. Freddie?
Wandila, I think so. The platform, are the roundtables. That's the idea, and that was the idea from the start when we negotiated this master plan. And it's, for better or for worse, roundtables, we still think, that's where private sector, where your industry partners, where there's research, and you can at least prioritize, and you can say, what do we do together? The tricky one is who does what, and who takes responsibility for what. And that goes to the industry organizations, organized agriculture, government, and that's where sometimes the roles are not as clear. And it's understandable. So that's something that we need to negotiate or sit around a table and say who's going to do what. Because that's also again to whether you are a member of which organization. The question is always, wat doen jy vir my leergeld? What are you going to do for my money? And that sometimes squeezes this narrative of organization to in a corner where you're saying, wat maak jy nou met my geld? But the question should rather be, what is going to drive us as a country in the industry forward? So yes, for the grain industry or whichever industry you are in, obviously you want the best for the industry. But there's like this common good that we need to figure out and say, you know what, Wandile Agbi's in that space, Agri SA's in that space, Grain SA's in that space. And I think those debates are now happening. And that's what makes me excited, is saying those debates are now happening. There's definitely the level of urgency is much higher to collaborate in a much more organized and focused way. So I think we're going to see very exciting things in the next year or two.
Fantastic. Tobias?
Yep, I'm one of the chairs of one of the value chain roundtables, and it's lots of fun. It's good to see all of the energy coming in, all of the opinions. So we're doing the prioritization. And the next steps will really be to allocate the responsibilities and also the difficult questions, where are you going to get the money for this? There's unlimited needs. We'll have to make some difficult decisions going forward. But I think there's a new environment as well. Personally, I quite like that there's a collection of politicos. You don't blame one party of, no, it's all politicians that's creating all of the problems. So that's good to blame people in general again. So that's lots of fun. But it's also, I'm traumatized at home now. Government has also changed with the kids growing up to be teenagers. Suddenly, I don't have to keep my wife happy, but I have to negotiate everything with all of the teenagers. So life has changed. It's going to be
many.
And there are many of them, and they have lots of opinions. And so life has changed, but it's an open and a more inclusive debate. Everybody's piling in creating a better future for us.
No, fantastic. Yolanda?
Wandile, I think there's certainly a renewed sense of optimism. It's been the constant thread throughout each of the speakers, and I think it's something we should be proud about. It's something that we should leverage in implementing the master plan. The value chain is up and running. We should keep each other accountable. Ferdi has a slide. He always speaks of the bended curve in agriculture. What is possible. And I think it's whilst we're in a spirit and we commit to implementing the master plan, we should start speaking roles and collaborating with each other and really get into the detail, as Tobias said, of who's going to do what. I think it's uncomfortable, but sustaining and getting comfortable with that uncomfortable discussions is ultimately the future of agriculture. And when you look across the spectrum of organized agriculture and government, there's certainly the leadership capability to pull this off. So from an agricultural perspective, broadly, I think we can be confident.
Fantastic. DG, any parting shot on your side?
No, maybe let's go back to maybe summarize where we are.
Right.
I know at the Agricultural Economics Society Conference, the president there made a very telling story. He talks about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And all of those surface in our sector. But we have got to embrace them, learn from where we might have had missteps, and take this country to the next level. And the AMP provides us with that platform to move there, where there is co-creation of the future that agriculture wants to be.
Thank you so very much, DG. To our friends online, I think one can really sum up the conversation that we just have in the last 90 minutes on saying that the policy in South Africa is clear. I know that when, after the election, I myself and the others wrote a piece where we said Ipindlela in isiXhosa, which was ways the way to where we're sitting at that time. And I think the way is clear now, which is that the AMMP is the guiding principle for South Africa. The government will continue to release the land with title deeds, which help us in closing the two agricultures that exist. But beyond the aspects that are industry specific in the AMMP, we have to deal with the logistics at the ports, municipalities and the roads, and also continue working on the export markets, on making sure that we are open on those roads, and the government to embrace science in terms of genetics and the new aspects that are coming up with the inputs, because all of that is key to agricultural productivity. And thank you so very much for following this discussion online, and to all of the colleagues that are in here in the auditorium. If we could give a round of applause to our excellent panel.
Well done.
Thank you.
In 2020 het Africa Agritech die tafel gedek en gevra, hoe lyk die landboutegnologie en wetenskap van die toekoms? In 2025, 5 jaar later, bring ons jou 'n verdere blik op die jare wat kom. Hoe gaan wetenskap, innovering, uitvindings en tegnologie die landbou soos ons dit ken verander? Om beter te boer, moet jy slimmer te werk gaan. Landbou van die toekoms, data en analises, biotechnologie, kartering en ruimtelike data, geografiese stelsels, slim besproeiing en meer. Sluit aan, neem deel, ontdek, innoveer. Met kennis kan jy die toekoms aangryp. Wees deel van Africa Agritech, 18 tot 20 Maart 2025. Sien jou daar!